I'm Dr. Duke, and I'm joined today by Alex Newman. Alex is a international correspondent and a primary writer, one of the primary writers for the New American magazine. Alex, you've written an interesting article for the New American about how RINO Republicans are now joining with Democrats in Congress to push global warming propaganda. Give us the background on the story.
Yeah, so this has been a trend that's been developing over recent years, and it's a very troubling trend because, the central plank of this effort to build a global government is to have this man-made global warming theory, first of all, taken at face value, and second of all, used as a justification to implement global taxes on literally every human activity. Because, humans exhale carbon dioxide. Every activity that you engage in releases carbon dioxide. So with the UN trying to claim CO2 as pollution, and that it needs to be taxed and regulated, you can see how every human activity would come under their control. Well, for a long time, they couldn't get anything through the U.S. Congress, but little by little, it started in 2016. You had a handful of Republicans who joined forces with some Democrats to create the Climate Solutions Caucus. The Republican who was involved in that, Carlos Curbelo, has now been removed from office by the voters. Obviously, the voters in Miami were not pleased with this liberal RINO backstabbing Republican, so he was removed from office. But now they just got a new one in the Senate, a Climate Solutions Caucus in the Senate, led by Republican Senator Mike Brown of Indiana and Democrat Senator Chris Coons of Delaware, and the numbers are growing.
So what is the reason why we know RINO Republicans aren't Republicans, and they're certainly not conservatives. They're wolves in sheep's clothing. But why now? Why are some of these so-called Republicans choosing this moment? And what do they, because you always got to ask the question, what do they stand to gain as so-called Republicans by working to a greater globalism?
Yeah, I think that's the really important thing to be thinking about here, because what's going on is, the globalist establishment has realized that the U.S. government is now the primary obstacle to this agenda. We have Trump now formally announcing we're leaving the Paris Agreement. It's done. They've been lobbying me for years. We're going to leave, period. And so the establishment, they've got all their credibility on the line here. They've been telling us for years that we're all going to be doomed from global warming. Before that, it was global cooling, but I guess they expect us to have amnesia. And they're realizing now that it's a do or die moment. In fact, I've talked to a lot of scientists, including scientists who've worked on the UN IPCC, who say we're heading into a cooling period. And so if the world starts getting dramatically cooler, these people are going to look so foolish. Not only will their credibility be destroyed, but their policy agenda will be destroyed. And so they've got a couple of key Republican RINOs who are now, showing their true colors. And Mike Brown is a new guy. He was just elected in 2018. He was elected with heavy backing from big oil. A lot of people don't realize, because there's so many lies on the mainstream media, big oil is totally in the tank for this man-made global warming hypothesis. They think they're going to profit, right? They think that this is going to allow them to make huge amounts of money. Goldman Sachs, all the mega banks are totally in the tank, the globalist billionaires. And so you have these Republicans, both Chris Coons and Mike Brown in the Senate were heavily financed by big oil, including ExxonMobil, by the way. And I figure what's going on here is Mike Brown thinks, hey, I'm not going to be up for re-election until like 2024. People will have forgotten years prior that I was the one who sold out the American people on this global warming issue. And I think in the House, we're seeing something similar. Now, some of the Republicans in the House who've joined up, there's, I think, 24, more or less. Some of them are in very liberal districts, like Peter King up in New York, super liberal Republican. And so he might be able to get away with it because he's in a liberal district. But I think the real reason why some of these Republicans are turning is because they want to be on the same side as the ruling establishment. And that's where this is going.
Right, I think that's a good point. They see the writing on the wall, right? That once Trump is out of office, and you get either another McCain-Romney type guy, or worse still, you get a Democrat, that this is going to fall pretty quick. One of the things that alarms me is they're just ready. Once they get this power again, seeing how the people spoke, the populist election of Donald Trump, and the fact that they've been trying to torpedo him from the moment that he took office, they're going to be darn well sure when they get power again, they're not going to let this happen to them. And so let me ask you this question. What does it say about the global warming movement? What does it say intellectually about the climate change mob that the most recognizable leader of the entire movement right now is a child, an intellectually stunted child from Sweden who's being dramatically used by her own parents, her country, and really the world?
I think it speaks volumes about the level of their arguments, right? They realize that the so-called scientific argument is not persuasive, largely because it's baloney, right? Again, if people can go on YouTube and they can see the videos I've done. Just recently, for example, I was in Stockholm. I interviewed the lead UN sea level reviewer for the IPCC. His name is Dr. Nita Zaxon-Morner. He was widely regarded as the world's preeminent expert in sea levels. That's why the UN put him on their committee, thinking, hey, he'll give some credibility to our pseudoscience here. Well, he's been studying sea levels for 50 years. And, people should go watch the video. He said this is all a giant hoax. Sea levels are not rising. They're not going to be rising. In fact, if anything, they're probably going to be dropping soon. The Earth is not warming. If anything, we're going into a cooling period. And he said, I tried to tell the UN all this when I was when I was the sea level reviewer. They refused to listen. And so he had to finally resign his position. He refused to have his name on that list to give credibility to a garbage report. So the science is certainly not getting stronger. And I think what they've realized now is they're going to have to use emotion, right? That's why they're trotting out little children. Oh, boo, I'm scared of global warming. That's why they depend on emotional arguments, right? The science is not solid. The science is not sound. In fact, the science is ludicrous. And so emotion is really all they're left with. I think that's why we see Greta Thunberg and some of these other children who are being manipulated and exploited being paraded around as the spokesman on this man-made global warming issue.
Now, you spent a lot of time, I know, personally and professionally in Sweden. Do you have a sense of how Greta is viewed in Sweden? I know Sweden has gone pretty hard left. Do they see her as a heroic figure or a kind of a tragic figure? How do the Swedes and the Swedish media generally paint her?
Well, the Swedish media treats her as if she were like literally a new, prophet or something. Right? It's absolutely obscene. And generally speaking, Swedish people believe the media. It's not like the United States where most people recognize the fake media as fake media. In Sweden, the public has still not reached that critical mass yet where they realize a lot of people realize, but the majority of the public, I would say, has not yet realized that they're being deceived on an industrial scale. And so Greta Thunberg is actually pretty popular among Swedish people. And in fact, she's very representative of the brainwashing that goes on in the schools there. In fact, we've talked about this before. They banned homeschooling in Sweden in recent years. They forced every school in the entire nation, including the ostensibly private schools, to teach the government's idiotic curriculum. This says, by the time they're in first grade, they need to know gender as a social construct, constant barrage of global warming propaganda. And so what happens is, talk about putting all your eggs in one basket. You have every child in the entire country being brainwashed with the exact same propaganda. So the risk becomes much lower that you suddenly get a child who comes along and says, wait a minute, the emperor has no clothes. The emperor is naked. Right? They've all been scientifically dumbed down and brainwashed using the same exact model. And so there are many, many Greta Thunbergs in Sweden, and it's very sad. And that's coming to America, too, more and more. You and I talk about this on a regular basis, what's going on in the schools here. Sweden is probably 10, maybe 20 years ahead of us on the insanity, but we're moving slowly in that direction. In fact, we're moving pretty quickly in that direction.
You say all kids in Sweden are getting the same liberal progressive education. Does that include Muslim kids?
Ironically, it does. They do bend over backwards to accommodate Muslim children. But what's happening is they are still pushing this secular, homosexual stuff, all of it on the kids. But what you see is also very interesting. It's the same thing we're seeing in the United States, where you have this kind of bizarre alliance that on the surface of things doesn't make any sense between radical LGBT groups and communists and socialists and atheists and Muslims. Well, why? What in the world do they have in common? And I think the very simple answer is, I've seen you've been talking a lot with Representative Matt Shea. I think he really understands this better than most. What you have is an alliance against Christianity, against the remnants of the church, and against kind of the basic standards of Western civilization. And in that, Islamists and LGBT and socialists and all these are united. Once they destroy us, or once they get to that point where they think they've destroyed us, then they'll turn on each other. There's no doubt about it. Homosexuality is a capital offense in Islam. There's no way that they're going to continue having homosexual pride marches through Islamic areas of Stockholm, for example, and get away with it. But right now they're allied, and it's very, very troubling. The same as in the United States.
Well, and the Christian churches are participating willingly. A group of Catholic nuns referred to Greta Thunberg as the next Virgin Mary. Let that sink in, right? The next Virgin Mary. And another group of Catholics called Greta Jesus' representative on earth today. So already our Christian churches have sold their souls for this involvement, right? The idea that the churches are a bastion against this is just not true.
That's exactly right, Duke.
Alex, thank you so much for your time today. We appreciate your travels and we appreciate your commentary. And you can read more from Alex Newman at the New American Magazine.